Here we go, guys. Part 1 of Lesson 2, The Renaissance, an art study. We're moving into Lesson 2 for the Renaissance, and this is the fun part of the Renaissance. We just start talking about artwork and different stuff, some things that are pretty amazing things that even today, by our standards, are really amazing as far as artwork and literature and things like that. So today we're going to start with an art study of the Renaissance, starting from kind of the beginning. Before we even get started here, I do want to let you know that most of Europe was not having a Renaissance. It was only a few cities, and they were usually rich cities that were experiencing this type of Renaissance. And the Renaissance went on for a long period of time. So as we talk about this, it's not just everything's happening at once. It's kind of stretched out from the late 1400s through even the 1600s. So it's a long period of time, but there are definitely some people in this time period that are very notable that I'm sure you've all heard of before that we're going to talk about. So let's get started. First of all, if you want to follow along and take notes, you can. We're going to really look at the difference in the beginning difference between Greek classical, medieval, and Renaissance artwork and see what was happening in the Renaissance to make it so much better than anything that was happening. And then at the end, if you want to talk about, we're going to do a fun exercise at the end of this in a couple weeks that I'm not going to talk about yet. But if you want to write down or talk about or reflect on whatever you think your favorite piece of artwork was in this little podcast, then you can. So first of all, before the Renaissance, people were doing art. Art didn't get started in the Renaissance. We're going to particularly look at Greek classical right now, and then we're going to look at medieval art. And first of all, let's look at some examples of Greek classical. So first of all, here in Greek classical art, as far as sculpture, it was really nice. It looked really, really good. So let me open up some Greek classical sculpture. So it was really well done, usually done out of marble, things like that. But one of the things about it, it's really idealistic, meaning it was a perfect form of a nose, perfect shape of lips, perfect eyes. Eyes are both kind of almond shaped. It looks really nice, but doesn't necessarily look realistic, meaning there'd be different folds here in the eyes. The hair, I always say it kind of looks like pasta, or it doesn't look like actual real hair, even though, again, not a bad sculpture, very good sculpture. It's an ideal form of a person. Then if we look at paintings during this time period, they're usually in what's called profile. So you can see here, it's just half of a face that people are either facing to the right or to the left. There's not really any background. I know this is on pottery, but still there's no background. And, it's very simplistic. Again, a nice piece of artwork, but nothing you probably look at and go, oh my gosh, I could never accomplish something like that. But this is Greek classical. Again, for paintings, no background. We have profiles. For sculpture, very ideal, the ideal form or thought of what you might think of how a human being might look. So very idealistic and very flat as far as painting. Now let's look at medieval artwork. Medieval artwork, it's a little bit more color into it, right? We saw the Greek classical, it was black, and I think those were actually Roman, but the Roman artwork was based off of Greek classical artwork. It was black backgrounds for paintings with one color of people in the front. Here, we have more colors. We have some reds, we have golds, we have all sorts of different things, but I want you to notice something about this picture. Think for a second. Take a look at it. There's really no, and what we're going to learn this word later, perspective. This picture, the subject, and this is the Virgin Mary is the subject here. She is just larger and put in the middle than everybody else. She's like a giant compared to the rest of the people in the picture. Even the people that are in front of her, she's way bigger than. And a lot of times in medieval artwork, you will see this gold background. So there's not really a background, it's just gold. And there's a lot of halos that happen in a medieval artwork. All these folks have halos around them. And then the baby Jesus here looks just like a little man sitting on her lap. Doesn't really look like a baby. So the realism isn't quite there. I have one up here too that we can focus in on a little bit more. Same idea here. We have the gold background. Again, this is the baby Jesus, which just looks like a small man sitting on Mary's lap. You know, as far as the proportions of the hands and things like that compared to each other, just not quite proportionally well done. Again, nice piece of artwork, but when we see what we're going to see next with the Renaissance, it gets a lot more incredible. Let's move on. So now we're going to start with the Italian Renaissance, and we are going to start with talking about a vocabulary word, patron. There were a lot of rich bankers in some of these trade cities like Florence. We have a family, the Medici family, that were rich bankers, and they had a lot of money, so they had money to spare. So what could they do? They could pay for artists, musicians, people to either perform for them or to paint for them. And they were known as, the Medicis were known as patrons. A patron is somebody who pays for somebody to do artwork for them. In this time period, you could tell that you were a rich patron because you would have portraits made of yourself. Remember, there's no cell phones, so you're not taking selfies. There's no cameras. So in order to actually have a painting of yourself, you would have to pay somebody to do that for you. And then you would want to pay the best people to do it, which would, again, cost some money. So in this case, we have the Medicis, the Medicis were based in Florence, Italy. And this is one of the big towns for the Renaissance, was Florence. A lot of stuff was going on in Florence at the time. The Medicis are still memorialized here. They have different structures that were built for them. We have a chapel here where there's a lot of the Medicis were interned or laid to rest after they died. A lot of references still to the Medicis today. So the next person I'm going to talk about, you have probably heard of, and he is known as the father of the Renaissance, and he is Leonardo da Vinci. I'm not going to go through all these videos. You can watch these when I share the slideshow with you, but let's go back over to the Google Earth and see where he's from. He's from a town called Vinci. He was outside of Florence. Very interesting fellow. He started out as an artist, obviously as a painter, and then a sculptor. He, along with those things, he was very good at mathematics and logic and architecture, just kind of did everything. So one of the things I want to look at first is this painting of his. It's a very famous painting. It's done on the side of a wall. It's called The Last Supper. And I want you to think about this painting compared to the first couple that we saw, or the paintings on the pots. If you notice in this painting, first of all, the people are facing in all different directions. So we have some profiles, right? If you were at a dinner with this many people, you would see the profiles of some people. And then some people are facing forward. So there's a lot of movement going on here. Your eyes go back and forth. The other thing that's happening in this is we have some perspective, meaning if you look into the background, there's hills and there's scenery outside of the windows that's farther away. He, in this painting, is using something called one-point perspective, meaning that all of the lines going back into the distance of this painting will converge at one spot on one point on the horizon. That's called one-point perspective. Perspective is a vocabulary word of yours. So perspective is using techniques to show depth in a painting or a drawing. There, you're trying to show that it's a three-dimensional space when it's really just two-dimensional. The next thing that we're going to look at of his is the Mona Lisa. Everybody says, well, why is it so famous? Why is it so famous? Well, there's a lot of reasons why it's famous. First of all, the painting itself is incredible. The painting itself is incredible. What you can't really see here, and I'll get in here, this lace around her head he uses a technique called sfumato, where you paint small layers of paint on top of itself, and you can still see that it's see-through, so it makes it look like it's lace. If you look at the hair, it looks like real hair. It doesn't look like this just idealistic form of hair anymore. Her positioning, she's not sitting at a profile, she's at a three-quarter pose. So that means her shoulders are facing one way, and then her head is facing the painter. There's a background. That's one of the things that makes this interesting is not only the painting techniques and how well done this background is fairly interesting. What's happening? We got a bridge down here. It looks like it's kind of stormy, or there's a lake or a river or something. So the background itself tells kind of a story. And yeah, there's some of the mystery around it is who was this person and where did she come from? Those types of ideas. People say, well, what happened to her eyebrows? Well, they believe that the eyebrows were accidentally removed in cleaning techniques of the Mona Lisa throughout the years. So that is Mona Lisa. Again, watch these side videos or do some more research on this if you'd like, because all these things are really cool, very interesting. And I'm again not going to go through these, but you have some cool inventions that he came up with. Now, well, that's the end of part 1 of lesson 2, the Renaissance and art study. See you in part 2.